The ship shuddered as if struck from below. In the lounge, drinks spilled across tables, chairs scraped as the floor tilted sharply to port. Shouts rose in confusion, first annoyance, then fear, as the tilt deepened and glass shattered against the wall that had suddenly become the floor. On the vehicle deck beneath them, cars and trucks wrenched free of their chocks and slammed into one another, horns blaring in a deafening chorus. A roar of water poured in unseen, fast and unstoppable. Within seconds, the Herald of Free Enterprise was on her side, lights flickering as the sea rushed in. It had been only minutes since the ferry had left the Belgian port of Zeebrugge, bound for Dover. Nearly 200 people would not survive the night. The Herald of Free Enterprise was a roll-on, roll-off ferry, one of the fastest ways to move cars, trucks, and passengers across the English Channel in the 1980s. Built in 1980, she was modern, capable of carrying more than 1,300 passengers and nearly 500 vehicles. She belonged to Townsend Thorson, a company that prided itself on quick turnarounds. At Dover, the ferry matched perfectly with the link span, the ramp that allowed vehicles to drive directly on and off. But Zeebrugge's ramp sat higher. To adjust, the crew routinely pumped seawater into ballast tanks forward, forcing the bow to settle lower in the water so the deck matched the ramp. It was a shortcut that worked, but it left the ship trimmed down at the head when she left port. On March 6, 1987, the Herald prepared for her evening crossing. Nearly 600 passengers boarded along with their vehicles, many heading home from Belgium or bound for weekend trips. Families wandered the lounges, truck drivers settled in after a week of work, and tourists admired the view of the harbor as daylight faded. The loading crew guided cars and lorries into position on the cavernous car deck. By 6 o'clock, mooring lines were let go, engines powered up, and the ferry eased out toward the harbor mouth. There was one problem. The massive bow doors, which sealed the vehicle deck against the sea, had not been closed. The job fell to a seaman stationed forward. On that night, he was not at his post. Another officer assumed it had been handled. Up on the bridge, there was no indicator, no alarm, no camera, nothing to confirm whether the doors were shut. It was taken on faith that they were. The ship gathered speed with her bow trimmed low, the doors still wide open. At first, inside the sheltered harbor, the mistake mattered little. But as soon as the Herald passed the breakwater and met the open North Sea, the difference was fatal. Green water surged over the threshold and into the car deck. The deck stretched the full width of the ship without barriers, and water spread across it instantly. As it sloshed side to side, it created what engineers call a free surface effect, erasing the ship's stability. The bow dropped further, more water rushed in, and the Herald began to heel. The process took less than 2 minutes. Passengers described the sickening sensation of the world shifting sideways, trays of food sliding, then people tumbling. Darkness hit as electrical systems failed. In cabins, luggage flew across rooms. In lounges, screams rose above the grind of twisting steel. Some tried to climb uphill toward exits that had become vertical shafts. On the car deck, trapped drivers never stood a chance as thousands of gallons of seawater tore through. By 6:28 p.m., the Herald lay on her beam ends in shallow water just outside the harbor. Rescue calls went out immediately. Zeebrugge's port authority scrambled tugs, pilot boats, and local fishing vessels. Helicopters thundered overhead, dropping winch lines. Survivors who managed to climb out onto the exposed starboard side clung against the bitter cold as rescuers hauled them off. Others smashed windows and leapt into the near-freezing water where harbor craft pulled them out half-conscious. Divers entered the capsized hull, searching cabins and corridors in total darkness. They found groups huddled together in air pockets, calling out until batteries died and silence took over. Despite the proximity to shore, the toll was staggering. 193 people died, men, women, and children trapped inside a ship that sank within sight of land. For every survivor, there was another who never came home. Investigators moved quickly, piecing together the timeline. It took only a glance at the wreck to see the open bow doors. Interviews confirmed that the man assigned to close them had been resting in his cabin at sailing time. Officers on the bridge had no way of knowing. No system existed to warn them. The practice of ballasting the bow down at Zeebrugge made the problem worse, lowering the doors dangerously close to the waterline. The official inquiry called it not just human error, but a systemic failure. The report seared the company with words that made headlines: a disease of sloppiness. The design of roll-on ferries also came under scrutiny. Their open decks made loading fast, but created extreme vulnerability if water entered. The Herald showed how quickly disaster could unfold. With no internal bulkheads on the car deck, just a few inches of water were enough to destabilize the entire vessel. Once the flood began, the outcome was inevitable. Public outrage was immediate. Townsend Thorson's name vanished, replaced by P&O. Regulations tightened across Europe. Ferries were retrofitted with door indicators, closed-circuit cameras, and alarms that could not be ignored. Procedures changed, so captains had to receive direct confirmation that doors were shut before sailing. Ballasting practices at ports like Zeebrugge were reviewed and corrected. New international rules on ro-ro ferry stability were drafted, requiring ships to survive flooding scenarios that previously had been untested. For families, none of it brought back the people they lost. Memorials rose in Dover and at Zeebrugge, etched with names that still draw flowers every March. Survivors spoke of the moment the floor became a wall, of crawling through smoke-filled darkness, of hearing children cry out and then go silent. Rescuers remembered pulling bodies from icy water within sight of the harbor lights. The inquiry transcripts, stripped of emotion, still carry the weight of what those minutes were like for the people on board. The Herald of Free Enterprise remains a textbook case in maritime safety, but it is more than that. It is a reminder of how quickly routine can become catastrophe when systems assume perfection. A seaman missed his duty. An officer assumed all was well. A captain sailed with no warning. A company tolerated shortcuts. Combined, they set the stage for nearly 200 deaths. What endures is the image of the Ferry lying on her side in shallow water, lights still glowing in the dusk, while rescue boats circled frantically. So close to land, so ordinary a crossing, and yet undone by a mistake so simple that it still defies belief. Thank you for listening to the Sunken Ledger. Subscribe for more true stories from the depths.